Since returning from China, the patient has had very limited movement outside her home. Now that this test is positive, we will continue to collect and confirm even more information about her activities and contacts. But we know already, for example, that she has not taken public transportation. She has not attended any large gatherings. And actually, to our best knowledge at this point, she has not had extended close contact with anyone outside her home since returning from China and prior to admission to the healthcare system.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin, along with Jeff Berkowitz. We're going to be taking a look at some of the top stories happening around Illinois and the nation this week. And Jeff, the coronavirus, which started in China and can be deadly, it's passed through breathing, respiratory infection, and now it is in Chicago.
That's right, Terry. This could be a major problem for the world, and it could be a major problem for, of course, the United States and Chicago. And you're describing that was the second victim, or second, well, yeah, I guess victim, second person to contract this in the United States. First was in the state of Washington. This was an elderly woman who I believe left the United States, left Chicago in late December, went to the city in China, which is the main problem here, Hubei, city of 11 million people, almost the size of the state of Illinois, and came back apparently with none of these flu-like symptoms, but I guess, or at least not when she got on the plane to come back. After she got back in the city, somehow that was discovered, and they jumped on it. The city of Hubei has now been quarantined. Apparently wasn't. You kind of wonder if the United States should have been a little bit more careful about setting limits on travel into Hubei.
Well, I think they are now, and the thing is, let's take a listen. Senator John Brasso, who's a Republican from Wyoming, was speaking on Capitol Hill today. Interestingly, he's a doctor, and so he started off by talking about the latest news here, this coronavirus, that now it's in the United States.
In terms of what we would do, since they're the symptoms of the flu, and there's a lot of flu going around, this is a virus that is a respiratory transmitted virus. Coughing, sneezing are ways that it's transmitted. Certainly, you want to cover yourself if you're doing any of those things. If you have a... Additionally, wash your hands. If you're sick, stay home. If your kids are sick, don't send them to school, because we certainly don't want transmission from person to person to person. This is an evolving disease and virus similar to the SARS virus that we've had previously, and I just ask people to take the appropriate precautions.
So,
yes, I may have misspoken. The city issue here in China is Wuhan, in the province of Hubei. But in any case, as Senator Brasso just said, the only thing you can really do is look to see if you're getting flu-like symptoms, and in general, wash your hands a lot, and that's it, and hope for the best. Right, Terry?
well, I guess so. I certainly am not know nothing about it. I would say this. It appears that so often, Jeff, you and I talk about government. We talk about regulations, and we have all this contentiousness. But this is an example of why we need government, and we need government to be cooperating with China in this case, international government. And one of the good news is here that I think our Illinois Public Health is working in a bite we won't show, but in a news conference today, they talked about how they're doing webinars with every county has its own public health. So they're informing all the local public health people. The state of Illinois is working with the CDC, and the CDC head, the Center for Disease Control, is saying that unlike some of the other problems that we've had historically in the past, the CDC is getting real-time data from the Chinese government. So the good news is there appears to be an awareness of how dangerous this can be, and governments around the world are working together on it. So we'll leave it to that. We'll follow it as we need to, but obviously that was a breaking story today out of Chicago, that there was a person in Chicago with it. But I think government in this case is doing probably all that they can do.
All right. So yeah, the breaking story. We're taping this on Friday, July 24th. You may see it
January 24th.
Why do I keep saying July? So sorry. Breaking news: as of January 24th, you may see this show this evening online, later on cable. But in any case, the breaking news last Sunday was Senator Don Harmon became the Senate president is controlled by the Democratic Party. I won't go into all those details. There was an election, first a mini election within the Democratic Party. Senator Harman beat Senator Lightford essentially, and then he was voted for by the entire Senate since Democrats had control of that. Mr. Harman got that election easily. And what do we say? Look, the Democrats have been in control of the Senate presidency since 2002. Okay, first it was Eno Jones in 2002, then Cullerton, who had been in the legislature for decades, became president in 2008, and now Harman. So there you are, 17 years in control of the Democratic Party, the Senate presidency, 33 years of the last 35, I guess that would be, in control of Mike Madigan in the State House as the Speaker since, since 1983. Okay, so 33, I think, of 35 years, something like that. And of course, the Democrats have had the gubernatorial chair since 2002, with the exception of 4 years for Governor Rauner. So what do we know? Oh, John Harman, if you're going to get to be elected Senate president, you're going to be like, because you're relying on your colleagues to make you their leader. And so we know that. He's a lawyer, Chicago Loop lawyer for a long time. He says he's stepping away. Doesn't quite say he's leaving his law firm. We'll find out more on what that means exactly. Usually people don't move up that political ladder and then step away. They usually take advantage of their political power newly acquired to benefit their law firm. We'll see if Senator Harman, deviates from that. What do we know about his policy? Well, look, he doesn't set policy. He molds it from the position of Senate president. Okay, he talks to his colleagues. And if he thinks something's important, he has to really persuade them to go with him as the Senate president. He's then got to persuade Mike Madigan, the Speaker, to go with him. He may have to persuade the governor to go with him. But what are we talking about here in Illinois? We're talking about the usual: pensions, education, Medicaid. Those are the big drivers of our to-be $42 billion budget. And we're talking about the capital fund, $45 billion. How does that affect your life? Well, does education
Well, look, those things are already
So-
passed. The thing is with Senator Harman about him, one, he is a very quiet person. He is not a gregarious person, as was John Cullerton, who was known for telling jokes. I know Don Harman, I don't know him well, but I know he is also very much for gun control, so that's bad news for those who are Second Amendment fans. And we just saw, of course, this past week out in Virginia, how thousands of people from around the country came up at the Virginia State House. So that could be a contentious issue going forward. But I think the other thing that speaks well of Senator Harman is that there is a gathering of a band that was be playing around in the Capitol here. And Don Harman was one of those members, along with a couple of Republican House members. So, Don Harman is a guy that gets along with people on both sides of the aisle, but as I said, he's very kind of quiet, studious, and obviously he earned the respect of his fellow senators. So,
one big test, Terry, we left out is, of course, corruption. There's a lot going on, as we've talked about many times on this show, from the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Chicago, and talking about ComEd, talking about the City Club, talking about cronyism, talking about Speaker Mike Madigan. A lot of subpoenas, some indictments. But everybody expects the big thing hasn't happened yet. And when that does happen, and it's likely to happen in 2020, we will want to see how the politicians react to that. And that will be a major test for Senator Don Harman. Likely, possible that nobody around him gets indicted. I think unlikely. Okay, but anyway, I think we got to go on because
we got to move on.
Next
Next Wednesday, Governor Pritzker is going to be delivering the State of the State. He'll be reviewing what they accomplished the year before. He'll be laying out some of the issues that he'll be focusing on in the coming year. So let's just take a quick look at the Pritzker agenda for 2020. Here's what the governor told some reporters just recently of one of the things that he's going to be focusing on.
Look, I will listen to any good ideas about property tax relief because we have to get at this in the state. It's one of the major priorities for me, and it's something that I think people across the state understand we need to do.
And certainly anyone who pays a property tax understands that's something that we really need to address, because that property tax is choking off a lot of people's ability to save money and provide for their own retirement. One of the other things, and it just happened this afternoon, the governor just signed a bill that's going to cap insulin payments and charges to no more than $100. That's impacting 1.3 million people, according to the governor's press office here in Illinois. And then gun control will be an issue, Jeff, and what else are you looking at?
Well, let me predict. Yeah, here's my pick for the top 10. We'll see if that happens in the big speech coming out from the governor. The progressive income tax. That's on the ballot in November of 2020. That is crucial, the governor would say, to his program. So he really wants to pass that initiative that would allow for a progressive income tax, would allow the Illinois legislature to set differential income tax rates for people with different incomes. Right now, we're all pegged at, I believe it's 4.95%. He wants to boost that substantially for higher income people. The people who are against that say that would be terrible for jobs and economic growth in Illinois. The people who are for that says that's exactly what the state needs to stabilize loss of population, et cetera. But that is item number one. Pensions are a big deal. It's on his list to deal with. And jobs, economic growth on his list. Property tax, as you've said, big deal. Those are four major items. He's also is concerned about the bill backlog, and then what is left, and the balanced budget, as he calls it. What else? Chicago casino, gaming in other areas in the state of Illinois, marijuana growth, implementation of the new marijuana law that legalizes recreational marijuana, the capital fund, that expenditure of much, but certainly not even maybe a sixth or so this year, perhaps, the expenditure of the $45 billion. Who will get the benefits of that? Where will it be spent? Early childhood education is tops on his list, education in general, but
Well,
especially
let's slow down a bit.
Well,
People are not taking notes, and if they are trying to take notes, you're going too fast. So the point is, it's going to be an agenda. The big things here are always going to be economic. One of the non-economic things that is going to be a big deal, the lieutenant governor is very keen on it, is prison reform, or criminal justice reform, I should say. And here's another bite from the governor recently when he spoke with the press.
Criminal justice reform is one of the major planks of our administration, something that we talked about for 2 years on the campaign trail, and we've already made strides in our first year. Going forward, in order to get to ending cash bail, you've got to make progress with all of the different counties, and so we'll have to break this up into pieces. But suffice to say that these are goals for our administration that we're setting out and being very explicit about, because cash bail should end.
That as we adjust to having no cash bond bail for the minor crimes. I understand that point. But we have to make sure we continue to have significant cash bond for the major crimes. So when somebody's been arrested on an illegal weapon possession, that's a big deal sometimes. That person's not turned around and put out on the public, because that person could be dangerous, and we don't want that person going out. So we have to draw the line properly.
Jeff, the other big issue around the nation is the impeachment of the president. I will tell you, I almost thought of looking up a video of someone snoring, because I was going to say, here's the reaction of the American people. From what I can tell, very few people are paying attention to this, and no one's taking it very seriously. You and I can remember Richard Nixon and Watergate, and we can remember Bill Clinton. Those were two serious issues of what the president was doing and should he be removed from office. But I don't think a lot of people are taking this one seriously, and I think they're seeing it as, a lot of people are saying it's a farce, and we'll have to see what impact this whole thing will have. Will the president be damaged, or will it be the Democratic Party that's damaged for bringing this to this point?
Well, Terry, when you say very few are watching, some estimates put that number at about 11 million. Now, that's not a lot relative to the 330 million in this country, but when at portions of that time, and this is changing by city and by network, but portions of the time that stuff is being carried almost everywhere on your major areas to watch on your TV channel. If you're in Chicago, there have been times it's been airing on all the local networks and all the major cable news networks. So, and it's very repetitive, and maybe the Democrats' bet here is that since people are coming in and out, it's not the same 11 million watching at any point, if there's 11 million. So they're trying to reach people that way by being repetitive. It is TV. People do look at TV. It makes an impact. That's number one. Two, look, this is a pitch for the November 20 election. As you say, it may hurt the Democrats because there are voters who may hold this against them and be more likely to vote for Trump as a result of the impeachment, or not. We'll see. Also, in those battleground states, and there's 7 or 8, these senators may be casting a vote either for more witnesses, which will be a big vote coming up next week.
I thought they already decided they weren't going to have witnesses.
No, not decided. What they decided was they wouldn't decide that issue at the beginning of the trial. They put it after the opening statements, 3 days for 24 hours, 3 days for the plaintiff's or House manager's case, and then 24 hours, 3 days, if they want it, for the president's case. And then a few other things, questions and so forth. Then they will raise at some point therein, probably about the middle of next week. Do they want?
Well, here's my prediction.
They want more witnesses and they want documents. All I'm trying to say is that vote, how senators vote in those battleground states, that could be important. And then, of course, whether they vote to remove the president or not would also be very important.
It's not.
Same thing in the other
Here's my. It ain't important. I mean, you would think it is. It isn't.
Yeah.
They're not going to remove the president. No one commits a crime on a conference call with about 12 people listening. I mean, you know, this is a bit of a farce. And look, Pete Buttigieg, or however he pronounces his last name, I've never mastered it, the mayor, was just in Iowa the other day and asked about this. He goes, I never get one question about impeachment. I don't think the American people are focused on this at all. They want to get on with the nation's business, and there's a lot of things that really are serious. And I think it's going to have some fallout and perhaps damage a lot of these people nationally. The other thing is we'll have to see what impact this will have, maybe somewhat as you're mentioning, on these congressional races, on some of these Senate races. My prediction is this is a big nothing burger.
Well, Terry, the case, if they want to summarize it, and we'll see if they choose to do this in prime time, they being the House managers, that case is very simple. They could just say, here's the question for you folks. When the United States Congress makes an important decision to give $400 million in military aid to somebody we view as an important ally, they would say, the Ukraine, and the president decides, they would say, the Democrats arguing this, the president decides to hold off on that aid as he endeavors, in his mind, to pressure the president of Ukraine to agree to an investigation of the Bidens, Hunter Biden and Father Joe Biden. The Democrats characterize that as digging up dirt. John Bolton characterized that as a drug deal.
All right. Let's move along.
Let me just say, if the Democrats can say that was the issue, how do you feel about that? Just remind you of one other statistic, okay? A number of, I would say, reliable polls say the majority of people in this country favor impeachment and removal of the president. So Terry, as somebody who seems to disagree with that as being, well, disagree with it.
I don't believe those polls.
You think those polls are just all wrong?
Yes.
This is not, we're not talking 1 or 2 polls, Terry.
I don't believe
You
them.
think they're all wrong? Okay. Well,
I don't think the American people are that clueless. Let's move on. And Jeff, earlier this week, I did an interview with an author, Alex Epstein, and he wrote the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And one of the things that is big among a lot of people is this idea that we aren't supposed to be using fossil fuels, the whole thing we get into, climate change and the rest. Mr. Epstein is saying that that's all wrong. You may be against fossil fuels. But you know what? We have no viable alternative. Let's listen to a bite from earlier this week.
It's only once we harnessed energy, once we figured out how to produce low-cost energy on a large scale, that we were able to use machines to transform the world from a dangerous and deficient place to a safe and abundant place. So I have the reverse view of people. People think fossil fuels make the world a bad place to live, and my view is no, fossil fuels make the world an amazing place to live. And if you restrict that source of energy without having an equal or superior alternative, then you go back to a natural way of life, which is a bad way of life.
And Jeff, this is something that people need to know. Here's U.S. energy consumption as we see from 2018. If you start over on that dark area, is oil. That's 36.5% of our energy. Many of them, the people that want to get rid of fossil fuels, they don't want the oil. They don't want natural gas, which is 30.6%. They don't want coal. So right there, oil, natural gas, and coal make up about 80% of the energy supply. They also don't want hydro because that would be damming more streams. And so they don't want nuclear. That's 8.3% of the energy pie. So without hydro, nuclear, coal, natural gas, and oil, what are we left with? That's 93% or so, 91% perhaps, my math is off, of our energy pie. And wind and solar are not going to cut it because wind and solar called baseload energy, and people need to know that term. That's the amount of energy that we can produce 24/7 a day. Obviously, solar doesn't work at night, and the wind doesn't always blow. And the one last thing people need to know is that we as a world don't have the technology to store massive amounts of electrical energy. We have car batteries. You can have a solar panel and turn a lamp on with a car battery, but you can't run the New York subways, you can't run the Chicago L, you can't do any number of things, including running your air conditioning off of a car battery. So these people, in Congress and some in the Illinois legislature that say we should ban fossil fuels by 2030 or 2050, whatever number they have in mind, you know, they have to answer the question, how are we going to plow our field if we don't use fossil fuels? How are we going to run our trains? How are we going to fly a jet if we don't use fossil fuels? And as of this time, everyone watching this program ought to reflect on it, no matter what you think of fossil fuels, is that we do not have a viable alternative to fossil fuels. Nuclear could be used for electricity, but obviously you can't plow a field with an electric combine. Even when we talk about going to electric cars, the question is, where's the electricity going to come from? And as we looked at that chart earlier, the vast majority of the ways that we produce our electricity is through coal, natural gas, and nuclear. In fact, Illinois is the #1 state in the nation for nuclear power.
So in short, what you're saying, I believe, Terry, is the problem is not a science problem. It's an economics problem.
No, it's a science problem or technology problem. We don't have a replacement for fossil fuels.
Well, or you could say, yeah.
I mean, because you can't, again, how are you going to plow a field? You're not going to do it with an extension cord to an electric combine.
I think the other side, and I hope we have somebody from the other side interviewed by you and ask that question to them. But I think what they would say, Terry, is that once you cut out the subsidies for these non-sustainable fuels that the United States has been engaged in for a century or longer, you would see that these other alternatives would arise and be much more competitive. And I guess some of those alternatives obviously are.
It's not a question just of economics. I just want to make that clear. Economics is a factor. I'm talking about how are we going to fly a jet? I mean, you know, wind and solar, even if they were free, you can't do it. People need to think in terms of us being an industrial society. We make steel. We have to melt steel. We don't have the ability to do that with wind and solar. You need a massive amount of electricity for an American society.
Well, number one, be clear, I'm not a proponent for those other ideas or those other proposals. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate that I believe those people who push those arguments would say that to some extent it's an economic issue and that the relative price has been skewed in favor of these non-sustainable fuels. I think they would argue that. They might argue the world will look a lot differently in 20 or 30 years, but you have to start making adjustments now. So the more plausible argument for these folks who differ with you would be to argue that at least start on that and start decreasing the amount of American consumption of these fossil fuels, not cutting them out completely. So there are some areas where you would be more easily able to substitute hydro and solar and wind, and some, as you would point out, where you can't. But I
want to move along to another.
Okay.
We can do more of this. Obviously, it's a big issue. Another issue that I had the opportunity earlier this week. The question is whether President Trump is going to be issuing a pardon for former Governor Rod Blagojevich. One of those who knows both sides of the aisle is Bernie Kerik, who is the former police commissioner of New York City and by himself also went to jail for a while. But he wrote an editorial in Newsmax that the president should pardon Rod Blagojevich. We interviewed him, and here's what he had to say.
Going to prison is like dying with your eyes open. It is a death sentence. It's a life sentence of collateral consequence to you and your family and everybody around you, primarily your kids. And I know there are people out there, which I think is moronic, they'll say, well, this was self-inflicted. No, I don't think it was self-inflicted. This was inflicted by a group of overreaching, overzealous prosecutors that did this for political reasons. This wasn't Rod Blagojevich is not a bad guy. You know what? Prison is for bad guys that do bad things. That's what.
Bad guys who do bad things, and he says, Rod Blagojevich is not a threat to society.
Okay, the better argument for Mr. Kerik to make is that he goes on in that interview to say everybody does this. Well, Mr. Kerik, everybody doesn't do what Rod Blagojevich does. Tried to do.
He's saying the politicians basically log roll.
Yeah, but that's different. They log roll and sort of some policy they want for another policy. They're trading one policy preference for another. What Rod Blagojevich was accused and convicted of was using his public power, his governmental responsibilities, and trying to trade that personal gain. That's a big distinction that the law makes. What he's right about is the sentence was crazy, okay? George Ryan did something quite similar, certainly terrible, certainly of a bad nature. He got 6.5 years.
I think that's the issue, Jeff. I mean, the issue
14
is
not 6.5.
I mean, personally, I would say Rod Blagojevich earned the right to go to jail for some of the things he did. But the question is, did he deserve 14 years? I think that's very debatable. I think my own thought is that we've already had our pound of flesh from Rod Blagojevich. But Jeff, sadly, we're out of time. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks, and please come.